Tonight we are presenting Charleston and the Jazz Age, and we have quite a bit to show you and explain. And as usual, what I like to do whenever we go back in time, which is mostly all the time, I like to put everybody in the frame of mind of the particular period. In other words, what were people thinking? What was the attitude in the jazz age, the 1920s? The 1920s, by the way, is the only decade that was given a title like that, the jazz age. No other, decade. You might think of the gay 90s, but that doesn't really typify what the gay 90s or what the 90s, the 1890s, that is, was all about. But the 20s, the jazz age, and you can also call it the Charleston age, and we'll get into why we might call it that. But what you're looking at is people doing the Charleston. And if it looks like it's really fast, keep in mind the photographer has speeded up the film. It's really not that fast, although sometimes it does seem so. So what you're looking at is various forms of the Charleston, which we will, expand upon, throughout the program. The footwork, the body work, et cetera, et cetera. We will discuss, and you will see in some detail. But I want to talk about the mood of the Roaring 20s, the jazz age. Lots of things that you need to keep in mind. First of all, if you lived back then, you were mindful of the fact that the Great War, which we call World War I, has just ended. And for a lot of people, it was truly a great, a world war, simply because most of the countries in the so-called civilized world, and even a lot of countries in what they considered the uncivilized world, were involved. Okay, never before in history has a whole world just about been involved in a very terrible war. In addition to that, the weapons used in that war were new to everybody. Airplanes, machine guns, flamethrowers, poison gas, never before used in combat, never before invented to be used in combat. And that war had ended. So people were rather euphoric about a war they assumed would end and there would never be another war. Prosperity. Everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but I'll explain what I mean by that. Most people were, or at least had the idea that business was booming. And for a lot of people, business was. The Coolidge era and the consumer economy, 1921 to 1925. Everybody was riding the big boom, the big business boom. Turned out to be false. In 1929, this all came to a crashing end. But the mindset of the people is that everybody is getting rich, everybody is becoming well-to-do, and all is right, with with the world and so on and so forth. So, that is working in people's favor. Other things are happening as well to give people, that impression. Fashion, particularly for women. If you notice the dresses that women were wearing, a distinct difference from the dress that most women had less than a decade earlier, where women wore bustles, tight-fitting corsets, all kinds of confining, dresses and so on and so forth. Women now felt free to wear whatever they wanted to wear, and what they chose to wear were really loose-fitting, long dresses that didn't reach below the knee, and that was radical back then, because the dresses that women wore before then went all the way down to the ankles. You could barely see the feet. Now you can see feet and legs, and even though that doesn't, really look dramatic to us, it did in 1920. Even the men got into it. They're wearing, suits, that make them look slimmer. Gone is the facial hair that men wore less than a decade earlier, the beards and whatnot. Even the mustaches seem to be, rather rare in the 1920s. So on the right, you see what the typical man and what the typical woman wore. Fashion is changing and changing radically, especially for women who are free of the confining garments that they wore just a few years before the First World War. Other things that gave people that feeling: art is changing. Pablo Picasso, 1921. This is three musicians. Not everybody got this, but the artists did, and a lot of people that followed the artists did also. Artists were free to express whatever they wanted to, okay, in terms of what we now call modern art. This is the Cubist style. There were other styles, and so on. So taking a look at something like this, the Three Munchkins, okay? Thank you, Susan. This, could very well have appeared on someone's wall back in the 1920s, and I suspect it will appear on someone's wall not too long from now. But the art world is really changing. Slang. In the 1920s, people adopted different ways of speaking, mostly young people. Mostly the younger generation has come up with different ways of expressing themselves that kind of mystified their parents. This is the cat's meow. That meant that this was really something good to remark on. These guys will kind of tell you what we're talking about.
Due for a comeback. Gams, legs, specifically a lady's.
Get a load of them gams on Louise. Her legs are like the stock market. They go up, 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 and up forever.
Spifflicated, drunk.
We got spifflicated at the gin joint and wisely invested all of our money in the stock market, whose roaring performance will surely continue to the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
The cat's meow, a person or thing that is extremely excellent.
America's economic performance is the cat's meow, I tell you.
Giggle water, any drink with alcohol.
Oh, God, I just lost everything. I'm ruined. I need me a giggle water, and quick.
Dewdropper, a young unemployed man who sleeps all day.
What malarkey. Now everyone will think I'm a no-good lollygagging dewdropper.
Applesauce, an expletive.
There are no jobs anywhere, and the trouble boys want me zapped. Oh, applesauce.
Clams, money.
How many clams can I get for selling my blood? I've got a whole trench coat covered in stuff right here.
Big sleep, death.
Fake my own big sleep? It sounds crazy, but I have nothing left to lose.
No one's onions. To be well informed on a subject matter.
This FDR fella sure seems to know one's onions. I'm sure he'll turn the economy around lickety-split.
Ducky. All right.
This New Deal sure is ducky. And now that everyone recognizes the wisdom of long-term economic planning, the economy will be ducky forever.
Okay, not unlike the 1960s when young people also invented their own language. Prohibition came into effect January 1st, 1920. This slide shows Prohibition ending at last in 1933. But while it was in effect during all of the 1920s, this created a lot of feelings during the 1920s, mostly that it was okay to drink, i.e. flout the law. Now, to be honest, Prohibition did not forbid people from drinking alcohol. It did prohibit the manufacture, sale, and distribution of alcohol, but most people thought it was quote unquote smart to drink, as much as they wanted to, and they had to get it either illegally, in a speakeasy or through your favorite bootlegger, or make it yourself, which again was illegal. So in the 1920s, oddly enough, it did curtail the drinking craze that happened before. Men drank pretty much as they wanted to, or almost as much as they did before Prohibition. oddly enough, before Prohibition, women hardly drank at all. During Prohibition, women drank like fish, simply because they wanted to flout the law. It was a cool thing to do, and everyone was doing it. So nobody really felt that, they would get into a lot of trouble by having a drink. Of course, there were a lot of people that did go to jail for, selling and making illegal alcohol. Votes for Women was a success. Again, in 1920, women's suffrage now became a reality after decades of, trying and, complaining about it and in doing, some radical things to get people to understand that women deserve the right to vote. In 1920, they got it and they voted. And I guess this gave women the idea, rightly so, that their freedom had arrived. So again, with their dress, with their ability to flout the law in drinking, and their ability to dance to Charleston, which we'll get to, women voted, okay? And they had voted ever since. Now, before the 1920s, probably the biggest dance in the country was the foxtrot. And I say biggest dance in the country, this is among the a sort of upper middle class white population of the country. The foxtrot was invented by a guy named Henry Fox, which was a pseudonym, in 1914. And it was designed to kind of follow the music of the day in a not so raucous manner. And it was also designed to be a rather easy dance for men and women to do as partners. So what you're going to see is Miss Flora Le Breton and Mr. Cecil Rubin, winners of the recent World's Amateur Dancing Championship, show you what dancing was like pretty much before the 1920s in terms of the foxtrot. As you can see, it is rather refined, rather an elegant affair. And do not get the idea that everybody was doing the foxtrot. Like I said, this is, among the upper, middle class white population of the country. Okay, doing the foxtrot. And what I want to do is go before the 1920s to get into the origin of the dance craze that would begin in the 1920s and extend up to the present day, the Charleston. Like many dances of the era, it had African-American roots, specifically in South Carolina, in the islands off the coast of South Carolina, the outer islands, where the Black population was rather isolated from the rest of the country. Therefore, they were able to maintain their language, their musical customs, and their dance customs. This is the Gullah or the Geechee population in South Carolina, and Charleston was the nearest city. So many of the men from these islands got work as dock workers, not only in Charleston, but all up and down the eastern seaboard. And they, like I said, had their own way of dancing that was really apart from other Black people in the country, simply because of the isolation in the islands off the coast. So the Charleston that we will get into doesn't quite exist yet. Again, it follows a lot of the what was going on, not only in South Carolina, but in other places as well. I should say that the dance really began with a guy named Juba in the 1840s and 1850s, a slave who had a particular manner of dancing that a lot of people emulated. And this kind of, percolated right up into the 20th century with the Gullah people, the Geechee people in South Carolina, or the islands off of South Carolina. And by now, that style of dancing was accompanied mostly by piano, melodies, which came to be known as stride piano. Now, the stride pianists at the time were James P. Johnson, Willie the Lion Smith. Later on, Fats Waller adopted that same style of dancing, and it was called stride because if you listen to it, you could almost imagine yourself striding down the street. Okay, it's kind of a walking tune, etc. And James P. Johnson, even though he was born in New Jersey, was a pianist who traveled around quite a bit and spent a lot of time in Charleston listening to what the Gullah Geechee people were dancing to, listening to their music. And he readily adapted it to his style of piano music. So if we have an example of that, you can hear what stride piano sounds like, following the mood or the style of the people that inhabited the South Carolina islands off the coast. Okay, as you saw from that last clip, a lot of it was the Jenkins Orphanage, which was really a band, but you might have noticed the black kids dancing in front. That was the real draw, and they traveled mostly around the eastern seaboard, exhibiting their style of music and their style of free dance. You might have noticed that some of it was Charleston, or at least reminiscent of Charleston, but we're not quite there yet. I mentioned Juba, whose real name was William Henry Lane, but he was called Master Juba. And you see a depiction of his dance, and it was rather wild. And as you may have seen or read from the slide, there were schools, quote unquote, in New York City and other big cities, but principally New York, where this was done. Basically, these are dance halls, bars, etc., where Black people, principally Black people from South Carolina, were free to do the dance that Juba had done in the middle of the 19th century, and somewhat refined, by the time this was done in the early part of the century. So you can consider Juba dancing, if I can call it that, to be kind of a pre-Charleston freedom dance done mostly by Black people from the islands off of South Carolina, but is beginning to catch on in the neighborhoods, particularly in New York, with Black people and with composers like Willie the Lion Smith, James P. Johnson, and I'm sure that Fats Waller was influenced also. So by the 1920s, a dance in the show Running Wild, which was performed in 1923, all Black musical, a raging success on Broadway, and the principal showstopper in this Broadway show was the Charleston, staged by, guess who? James P. Johnson. So the music that he had heard and was influenced by showed up in this musical, and now everybody saw what the Charleston looked like. So it was choreographed. The music was done by James P. Johnson, who wrote the song that we now associated with the Charleston, called The Charleston. And the fact that people recognize that song 100 years later is testimony to the success. Running Wild lasted about 14 months, but the dance from the show went on. What you're about to see is a Fox Movietone newsreel, 1926, with B. Jackson dancing in front of the Jenkins Orphanage in Charleston, South Carolina. She actually traveled with, the orphanage band and the dancers. Kind of unusual for a white woman to do that, but you can see that she was really affected by the Charleston. And the more she danced, the more creative she got, and to the point where she was an actual fixture whenever the orphanage appeared to perform their music. So now we're going to show you the Movietone newsreel, 1926. How about that, 1926? And here's the Jenkins Orphan Band out of Charleston, South Carolina. Here's what they look like. And like I said, originally it was the band that was, pretty much, pictured, and it was the band that performed. But as you can see from that last clip, the music that they played generated lots of people dancing, particularly white females. And I should say here that we're going to show you lots of Charleston examples, but pay attention to what the women are doing. I mentioned earlier that women felt an incredible amount of freedom in the 1920s, and it shows in the dance. The men did an incredible, job of doing the Charleston, but I'm not sure the men felt the same kind of freedom. After all, white men were already free to do whatever they wanted. Women were not. So basically, the wild abandon way that a lot of women danced to Charleston was, in a way, their way of saying, now we're free to do whatever we want, and here we go. So what you see is B. Jackson teaching other women how to do the Charleston, and they are paying attention. And later on that clip, you saw the black kids in front just doing what kids do naturally, just moving to the music. And, I'm sure you noted the Charleston steps that they were doing. Keep in mind, Running Wild had already closed a couple of years earlier, but the Charleston craze that it created, moves on. So on to more videos. This video features dancers Mary Texas Guinan, and I could talk a lot about Texas Guinan. She was a pistol in more ways than one. Stella Doyle, Miss Bourne, and Josephine Baker, I will talk a little bit about, because she, deserves to, more than just a little mention. But the music is added, and the music, the title is I'm Gonna Charleston Back to Charleston. Coon Sanders Nighthawks, 1925. Let it rip. How's that for Charleston variations and whatnot? People felt that they could alter the steps and such, and simply express themselves however they wanted to, depending on the music that they were listening to and how they interpreted that music with their bodies. Again, we're mostly talking about women, not that men did not do the Charleston, they certainly did. But the women, is, in my opinion, felt more of the freedom that the music, instilled in them to do any number of things that the men were not doing. So here we have some pictures of, people doing whatever to, probably to Charleston music. I should mention that the music you hear with the clips that we've shown so far was added later, seeing as how most of the clips were done during the silent era before talkies and such. But in any case, what you did see is a good random sampling of Charleston, solo Charleston mostly. We will get to lead follow Charleston, but here we have a movie tone newsreel outtake, 1930, featuring Nick Long and the dancers from the Street Singer Company doing 1920s Charleston.
The new long skirts that women are wearing today have already influenced ballroom dancing. A season or two ago, when the skirts were above the knee, the dances were free and wild, something like this. All right, Jane, love, this is our dance.
Okay, basically that was an outtake. Apparently they did a better take that they were happier with, but what you saw was partner Charleston. And what you also saw, whether you realize it or not, was a breakaway. Partners breaking away from each other to do a solo step or two, which at the time was rather unusual. We'll come back to that concept in a bit. And Susan and I had a discussion about whether that's the Capitol building in the background or not, or whether it's just a state building in any state in the union. But in the foreground, again, you have people dancing the Charleston. And but the last few clips, what you saw were people almost spontaneously doing the Charleston, even though that probably not the case, probably a setup. But the idea is that seeing as how the Charleston is taking over the land, people are just bursting out doing the Charleston on city streets or anywhere they're inclined to. Where they got the music from, I don't know. But again, this shows you that, wherever they happen to be, they just happen to burst into, a Charleston type of dance. And you can imagine that from the still that you're looking at. Okay, now I did mention that people did do partner dancing and so on, and they did it in clubs, restaurants, wherever there was, room to do it. And notice that we're talking about white society, usually middle to upper class white society, doing a dance that they've interpreted from the music that was prevalent at the time, started by Black people, almost a generation earlier in the pre-Charleston days. But what you're looking at are the type of people that were kind of in the know and did the Charleston. I mentioned Josephine Baker earlier and said that we would, get to her. She was an international dancer. Josephine Baker was a Black woman who was very famous for doing all kinds of goofy Charleston moves with as little clothes as possible. And seeing as how that was kind of a no-no in this country, she moved to Europe to do it, to France, Germany, and because of her, the Charleston now becomes international. It spread to England, France, Germany, and other countries where people, I guess, couldn't resist the Charleston craze that had already taken over the country. So I believe we have a clip of Josephine Baker doing her goofy Charleston stuff that she was known for. Okay, dancing on the piano. Okay, this got to be very popular, and you can imagine the music going on and the Charleston, she is doing. The next slide shows a phono film, 1925-26, A Night in Dixie, a Lee DeForest phono film, featuring the Club Alabama review with the Billy Fowler Band. Gene Starr performing what may be the first solo Charleston in any commercially released sound film. Now we're going into soundies, and Lee DeForest was an inventor who was almost primarily responsible for amplificated sound on film, and a lot of other inventions as well. Okay, that may have been the very first solo, and obviously a choreographed Charleston routine, one of the early ones, very early 30s. Again, with sound.
Old man, be quiet.
A Night in Dixie with Gene Starr in the center. Okay, that was Charleston Aerials. Jazz Age Dance in the Movies. Now, by the time the movies got hold of the Charleston, you knew that it was popular because the movies didn't project anything that didn't make money for them. So from 1928 until 1930, the background music is Lud Glushkin's 1929 recording of Doing the New Lowdown, okay, which is anything but new in 1928. But in any case, Charleston now hits the movies.
to play that crazy thing again. Got to do that lazy swing again. Hi-ho, doing the new low down. Got my feet to misbehaving now. Got a soul that's not for saving now. Hi-ho, doing the new low down. That dancing demon has my feet in a trance, 'cause while I'm dreaming, I go into that dance. Once you hear that haunting strain to it, like a bet you'll go and say to it, hi-ho, doing the new low down.
I consider that an excellent clip. By the way, did you notice the guy who, kind of doing the snake hip slide there? But mostly what you saw, again, were women doing the Charleston because they were the best ones to do it. Because, at least in my opinion, because of the freedom they felt to do such things. Men always had, freedom to do whatever they want. So not that they were bad at doing the Charleston, but again, I'm repeating myself, but with the purpose, the women are the ones that are really generating the Charleston, especially, during this time. That last movie clip was late 20s, early 30s. And you might have noticed sort of a, kind of a 30s motif in there, kind of an Art Deco sort of a deal that we're kind of morphing into with the late 20s and early 30s. And you did see, some partner dancing. And in the middle of it, you didn't see Charleston, you saw Foxtrot, which was a good contrast to the, the gay abandoned type Charleston that the rest of the clip showed. Okay, we're going to show you what we are showing you is a Charleston couple. And now we're going to show a dance contest with Colleen Moore, who was a very popular movie actress back in the late 20s, early 30s. And this is called Why Be Good, released in 1929. Okay. By the way, that film seems speeded up to me. It wasn't quite as fast as the video depicted. But by the time we're doing Charleston contest, again, that's another clue that the Charleston is that popular, that everybody's doing it. So let's see who can do it the best. Now, it's so hot in this suit, right? I'm free. And freedom is really the watchword, at least in my mind, for the Charleston. After 7. Now, we've had discussions about what 7 means. 7 is really Black English for 7. After 7, meaning after 7 o'clock. And we showed this clip before. It's really an important clip. You will see Shorty George Snowden, who invented the Lindy Hop, and I'll talk a little bit about that, after the clip. But what you're going to see are three dancers or three dance couples doing the Charleston, but not the way you've seen the Charleston done so far. I would say that this is kind of a link between the Charleston of the 20s and what will come in a few short years with Lindy Hop in the early to middle 30s. So this was released in May of 1929, and the music is Chick Webb and his orchestra. So I'll let you see the clip and then we'll comment on it.
Couple number 2, Mr. Oliver Hemingway and Buzzsaw Mamie. Couple number 3, Shorty Stump and Liza Underdunk.
What you just saw is probably the best clip I can come up with, or the best clip I've seen that illustrates the Charleston of the 20s and what will become the Lindy Hop in the 1930s. That last couple featured Shorty George Snowden, who invented the Shorty George move, and Lindy Hop. And anytime you saw the couples separating from each other, that was called the breakaway in those days, which would become the swing out. There were obvious Charleston moves in all three dancers. And again, the fancy footwork denoted the jazz steps. So if you think of Lindy Hop as jazz steps, Charleston moves with the swing out, i.e. breakaway, as the mainstay, basically you saw the precursor to that in that last clip, after 7. So, like I said, that's probably the most important clip, the most iconic clip I can think of, off the top of my head. Here we see in a dance club, or what you saw in the dance club, were people dancing and doing all kinds of crazy splits and such. Sunday Sinners dancing, 1930s Charleston into swing. Again, by the 1930s, we're incorporating 30s Charleston rather than 20s Charleston into what would become swing dancing. So let's see what that looks like.
Now for the big moment of tonight's festivities, ladies and gentlemen. Our monster dance contest. Of the many contestants enrolled, we have chosen 9 couples to compete for first prize. And here they come. Let's give it to them. Yes, indeed.
Okay, another very important clip. Lots of breakaways or swing outs, as we would call them now. Lots of Charleston moves. I'm sure you saw a lot of Charleston there. So even though that clip was 1930, you can see where the Charleston of the 20s is morphing into a more low down Charleston in the 30s, done partner style with a lot of fancy footwork. And here's a picture of, people doing the Charleston. Notice the guy on the right, split leg, the guy on the left, kicking back and so on and so forth. And the woman on the left who is kicking forward, and all the people in the back watching. So by now, of course, Charleston is not exactly old hat. It is extremely popular, but it has maintained its popularity for about 8-10 years up until, this point, and would continue, well beyond that. Charleston poses, dancing in the street. Now here's a Charleston routine in T for Two. We move up to 1950, only to show you that even by 1915, again, we've gone almost 30 years beyond the advent of the Charleston, it is still popular enough to incorporate in movies. So it's a 1950s Hollywood take on the 1920s Charleston, featuring Billy Dee Wolfe, and you will also see Doris Day in this clip. So let it roll. Okay, Billy Dee Wolfe, Doris Day, and Eve Arden in that at 1950. And even though people are no longer doing the Charleston on street corners and whatnot, it is still popular enough to be put in movies. And again, the original Charleston song is played simply because it would be recognized by just about anybody in the country 30 years after it was first performed in Running Wild. So, there you have it in color in a relatively modern movie. It is still popular. So showing how popular it still is, we move on to what I would consider to be the present day. Naomi Uyama is a very excellent dancer. She has her own band. She's an excellent singer. And there are a few of us that have taken classes with Naomi. And what you're going to see is Blame It on the Blues, Sidney Bechet, and Naomi doing a brief stint of solo Charleston. Okay. That was Naomi, and I should give a shout out to Naomi because at the beginning of the pandemic, we prevailed upon her, some of us, to show us on Zoom some jazz steps that we could do, and she did an excellent job of that. So that was solo Charleston done in the 21st century, and now we're going to show you a couple of dancers, particularly Frida. I am less familiar with Sicarius, but Frida I have taken lessons with at Swing Out, New Hampshire, and so is Susan. So what you're going to see is partner Charleston done 21st century style. Go for it. So in case you thought the Charleston was a thing of the past and stuff that we did in the 1920s and we no longer do, well, that clip should dispel that myth because the Charleston is alive and well. And I believe that clip was done in Germany at a contest and so on. There are contests, Charleston-specific contests all over the world, and in, as well as this country. And what you're going to see, I believe this is our last clip, unless Susan surprises me, a 1920s Charleston workshop performance that some of us worked on for quite a while. And as you can see, the date is this month, okay, just a couple of weeks ago. Shout out to Chester Freeman, who is the choreographer. And the dancers you will see are Chester, Susan Simon, Barbara Bash, myself, and the music is Sister Cake by the Diddy Bops. So again, just a couple of weeks ago, we've pretty much, come almost 100 years. And let's see what we've come up with here.
Shake me like my sister Kate. Shake it like a ball jelly on a plate. My mama wanted to know last night. My sister Kate could do it all so nice now. All the boys in the neighborhood. Hey, this shimmy is mighty good. Well, maybe late, but I'll be up to date when I can shimmy like my sister Kate. Oh yeah, shake it like my sister Kate. Sister Kate, never stay home, stay out too late. I give myself a nice high to kite. You know I do it for you every night now. All the boys in the neighborhood, you're getting good shimmy, it's mighty good. Well, maybe late, but I'll be up to date when I shimmy like my sister Kate. Oh yeah, shake it like my sister Kate.
And there you see our attempt at continuing the Charleston tradition. Over 100 years later, we're still doing the Charleston and loving it. And if a number of us want to prevail upon Chester to at some point in the near future to do another Charleston series, getting into some of the Charleston moves that you've seen, et cetera, that would be great. What you're looking at are some of the clips from the past, Charleston type performances and so on. So like I said, it is still something that we do right here in the Hudson Valley. And those of you who have not, experienced this, we invite you to do so, to try it. Continue the tradition. Let's move it on.